At our annual family trip, my daughter-in-law told my grandson, "She's not your real grandma. Not really family like us." Her cutting words meant to wound. But seeing my grandson's confusion, I simply smiled. They thought I was a burden, a charity case. They had no idea the game I was playing. My revenge is just hours away. I hope you'll stick around to hear my full story. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The lake house was a beautiful place. If you ignored the undercurrent of resentment that usually accompanied Eleanor's visits with her son, Michael, his wife, Bethany, and their son, Ethan. For years, 70-year-old Eleanor had endured the subtle slights, the backhanded compliments, and the passive neglect that had become the defining rhythm of their family interactions. Bethany was the conductor of this symphony of disrespect, and Michael, Eleanor's own son, played the part of the oblivious, complicit bystand. Tonight, however, on this annual family trip, a new melody began. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, as Bethany, emboldened by a second glass of wine, leaned conspiratorially towards 8-year-old Ethan. They were all on the expansive porch, the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore, a stark contrast to the sharp words that were about to pierce the twilight. Ethan, a bright and sensitive boy, was recounting a school project about family trees, his eyes alight with the simple joy of discovery. "You know, honey," Bethany slurred, her voice syrupy sweet but with an unmistakable edge that only Eleanor seemed to catch. "She's not your real grandma. She's just your father's mother, honey. Not really family like us, you know. Your real grandma. On my side. She's the one who really counts." Ethan's small face crumpled in confusion, his brow furrowing as he glanced from his mother to Eleanor. A familiar pang of something akin to pity, not hurt, stirred within Eleanor. For years, she had braced herself for such direct assaults, steeling her heart against the inevitable sting. But tonight, a profound sense of relief washed over her, a calm that settled deep in her bones. This was it. The confirmation she had been waiting for. The final piece of the puzzle, falling into place. A genuine, knowing smile spread across Eleanor's face, a smile that held no malice, only satisfaction. It confirmed everything. Her 3-year poverty performance had been a resounding success. They truly believed she was a penniless widow, a burden, a relic to be tolerated. Just then, Michael ambled onto the porch, phone in hand, his gaze distant. "Everything all right out here?" he mumbled, barely looking up. He caught sight of Eleanor's smile, an expression he clearly found out of place. "Mom, why are you smiling like that? It's a bit odd." He then turned to Bethany, a defensive posture already assumed. "Bethany, what are you telling him now?" "Oh, nothing, dear," Bethany chirped, her tone instantly saccharine. "Just talking about family, that's all." Explaining things to Ethan, Michael simply grunted, seemingly satisfied, and retreated back to his digital world. Eleanor's gaze drifted across the lake, memories swirling like the evening mist. She thought of countless holidays spent on a lumpy pull-out couch, while Michael and Bethany occupied the guest room. She remembered the special meals served on fine china for them, while her plate was often paper, a subtle but persistent reminder of her perceived lower status. The thinly veiled comments about her inability to contribute financially, the way her opinions were often dismissed, all of it built into a suffocating narrative of her worthlessness. It had been hard to play the part, to feign meekness and gratitude, but it was all part of her elaborate plan. Suddenly, Ethan, still looking a little bewildered, disentangled himself from his mother's side and clambered onto Eleanor's lap. He nestled against her, his small arms wrapping around her neck. "You're my real grandma, Nana," he declared, his voice firm, as if trying to erase his mother's words. A warmth spread through Eleanor, a love so pure it almost brought tears to her eyes. Ethan was the one bright spot, the innocent soul in this carefully constructed charade. Bethany, however, rolled her eyes, a gesture of exasperation not lost on Eleanor. "Ethan, honey, get down from there," she said, her voice strained. "Nana needs her space. Go inside and get ready for dinner, please." Ethan, sensing the shift in his mother's tone, reluctantly slid off Eleanor's lap and scampered inside. Eleanor remained on the porch, alone in the deepening twilight. The cabin, this luxurious retreat, was her secret. She had suggested the trip, and then subtly arranged for Michael to find a fantastic deal, implying he was the one footing the bill. In reality, she had paid for every last detail, from the rental fee to the catered meals, all through her attorney, David Miller, ensuring no trace led back to her. The irony was almost comical. They assumed Michael was graciously covering her living expenses, believing that after Arthur, her late husband, had passed, he had left her with nothing. Oh, if only they knew the extent of Arthur's careful planning and Eleanor's own quiet acumen. From inside, the muffled sound of Bethany's voice carried through the screen door, complaining, "Honestly, Michael, she's becoming such a burden. Always needing something. Always here. And the expenses. It's just too much." Eleanor's smile tightened, a cold, resolute curve of her lips. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed a message. "Tomorrow evening, during dinner. Have everything ready." The response from David Miller was swift. "Understood, Eleanor. All arrangements confirmed. One more night. One more night of being treated as an unwanted guest. A charity case. An inconvenience. She could endure it. The end was so very near. Dinner was a predictable affair. Eleanor's plate held a noticeably smaller portion of the gourmet lasagna Bethany had ordered in. Michael was absorbed in his phone, occasionally grunting a reply to Bethany's chatter. Ethan, bless his innocent heart, was the only one who seemed truly present, trying to engage Eleanor in conversation. "Nana," he piped up, his mouth full of pasta. "Mommy said, we won't be visiting you as much anymore. Because of, expenses and stuff. Is that true?" Bethany shot Ethan a withering glare, but Eleanor merely patted his hand. Her heart ached for the boy. But this, too, was part of the lesson they all needed to learn. "We'll see, sweet pea," she murmured, a gentle kindness in her voice that belied the storm brewing within. Expenses. She thought of the $50 million tucked away in various trusts and investments. The sprawling real estate holdings Arthur had painstakingly acquired and passed to her, the quiet but vast wealth they believed she lacked. Ethan would understand eventually. He would know the truth, not the fabricated one. Eleanor took a sip of her water, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Tomorrow, the harsh morning light filtered through the blinds of the lake house, doing little to soften the edges of the pull-out couch where Eleanor had spent yet another uncomfortable night. Her back ached, a familiar protest from the thin mattress, but her mind was sharp, focused. Today was the day of reckoning. The culmination of 3 years of careful, calculated deception. She traced the rough fabric of the blanket with her finger, her thoughts drifting back to the genesis of it all. To Arthur, her beloved husband, and the painful weeks following his death. 3 years ago, when the finality of his absence had settled like a heavy shroud, Eleanor had made a profound decision. She would hide her substantial wealth, she would shed the comfortable skin of affluence, and present herself as a woman brought low by grief and poverty. It was a cruel test, perhaps, but she felt it was a necessary one. She needed to see the true character of her family, especially Michael and Bethany, when they believed she had nothing left to offer but her presence, or worse, her needs. Eleanor and Arthur had always lived frugally, a habit born not of necessity, but of principle. They believed in discreet wealth, in the quiet accumulation that didn't demand attention or lavish displays. Their friends often remarked on their humble home and modest lifestyle, unaware that beneath the surface, Arthur was a financial wizard, quietly investing, growing their fortune with shrewd foresight. Eleanor, too, had played her part, contributing to their shared nest egg, starting with an inheritance from her Aunt Clara that she had never mentioned to anyone, not even Arthur. It was a significant sum, enough to kickstart her own discreet portfolio, mirroring Arthur's strategies. While he managed the bulk of their investments, she nurtured her own, a secret garden of financial growth. By the time Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep, Their combined net worth had quietly swelled to an astonishing $50 million. He had ensured every asset was legally transferred to Eleanor, a testament to his trust and foresight. The funeral had been a somber affair, filled with polite condolences and fleeting expressions of grief. But a mere 2 weeks later, the facade began to crack. Michael and Bethany arrived at Eleanor's home, ostensibly to check on her, but their true agenda quickly became clear. They sat in her living room, a room filled with the ghosts of Arthur's laughter, and Eleanor watched them, a detached observer. Bethany, ever the pragmatist, was barely able to conceal her impatience. "Mom," she began, her voice carefully modulated. "We've been talking, Michael and I, about your situation." The word situation hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications of destitution. "It's just, with Arthur gone, and his pension, well, things must be tight, right?" Eleanor simply nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, dear. Very tight. Arthur was so good about handling all the finances." A half-truth, but effective. "Exactly," Bethany pounced. "So, we think it might be best if you considered an affordable senior living community, something with amenities, and companionship. It would take a lot of pressure off you. And," she continued, her eyes already scanning the comfortable but not ostentatious furniture, "you could sell this house. It's quite a large property for one person, and the upkeep, well, that's expensive." Eleanor glanced at Michael, her son, the boy she had raised with such devotion, making countless sacrifices to ensure he had every opportunity, now sat with his gaze fixed on the floral pattern of the rug. Avoiding her eyes, he mumbled agreement, a hollow echo of his wife's words. He had accepted it. He was allowing his mother to be cast aside, deemed a financial burden, an inconvenience to be managed. The ache in her heart was profound, but also clarifying. This was the truth she sought. "That sounds sensible, Bethany," Eleanor said, her voice soft, belying the storm within. She played along, a master actress in her own drama. She sold her house, but not without first moving into one of the apartments she already owned in a different part of the city. A modest, 2-bedroom unit that blended seamlessly into a middle-class neighborhood, far from her previous upscale community. She created an illusion of struggle, of downsizing out of necessity. "The rent is quite expensive, she'd tell Michael on their increasingly shorter and less frequent phone calls. "It's hard to make ends meet." Each mention of expensive rent seemed to shorten the calls further, solidifying his belief in her financial hardship, making him less inclined to burden himself with her troubles. Bethany's invitations to family gatherings dwindled to almost nothing. "It's just so costly to host, Mom," she'd explain. "And with Ethan's activities, we're just stretched thin. Maybe we can just do a simple lunch next time. And for your birthday, maybe just a gift card?" The thinly veiled suggestions, the casual dismissal, all confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. She was no longer a valued family member, but a charity case. An obligation. Eleanor perfected the role. She wore older, faded clothes, carefully chosen from her existing wardrobe to appear worn but not destitute. She bought generic groceries, meticulously planned her meals, and apologized profusely for the meager gifts she gave on holidays. Small, handmade items, or inexpensive store-bought trinkets, all while her hidden wealth continued to grow, silently, exponentially, through smart investments and careful management. She was a silent spectator to her own diminishing standing, observing, learning, and planning. The morning after the cutting words on the porch, Eleanor awoke to the familiar discomfort of the pull-out couch, but her spirit was surprisingly buoyant. The end was in sight. Reflecting on the past 3 years, Eleanor acknowledged that while the financial deception had been easy, the emotional toll had been immense. The most painful part of her deliberate test wasn't the material deprivation she feigned, but witnessing her family, particularly Bethany, embrace her supposed poverty with an almost zealous enthusiasm, and how it had been used to slowly, systematically erode her precious relationship with Ethan. No one had ever questioned her struggles. No one had offered genuine help beyond superficial suggestions, They had simply, and quite effectively, written her off. Eleanor, the quiet, dignified matriarch, had become Eleanor, the pitiable, slightly inconvenient relative. Bethany's enthusiasm for Eleanor's new status bordered on cruelty, often disguised as helpful advice. "Oh, Mom, you really should check out the thrift store on Elm Street," Bethany would say with a bright, false smile, her eyes sparkling with what Eleanor perceived as a wicked glee. "They have such lovely things for next to nothing. And have you tried clipping coupons? It really saves a fortune." Eleanor would nod meekly, feigning gratitude. While inside, a cold resolve solidified. She saw the gleam in Bethany's eyes, the satisfaction of seeing Eleanor brought low, of having someone else to look down upon. But the deepest, most agonizing cut was Bethany's insidious, systematic effort to teach Ethan that Eleanor was less important, less worthy of his affection. It was a subtle indoctrination, a slow poisoning of a pure relationship. Eleanor's presence was tolerated, her love was secondary, and crucially, her value was implicitly tied to her financial contribution, or lack thereof. Eleanor remembered overhearing Bethany speaking to Ethan about his school play, a nativity scene where he was to be a shepherd. Ethan had been so excited, asking if Nana could come. "Oh, honey," Bethany had said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Nana would just love to be there, I know. But you know she's on a very tight budget. Travel is so expensive for her right now. It just wouldn't be fair to ask her to spend that much." Eleanor, who could have chartered a private jet to fly across the country to see her grandson's performance without batting an eye, had swallowed the bitter pill. Bethany skillfully framed her actions as protection from embarrassment, shielding Eleanor from the shame of her supposed poverty. In reality, she was systematically erasing Eleanor from Ethan's life, creating distance, fostering a sense of difference. Michael, Eleanor's son, passively allowed this to happen. When Eleanor gently voiced her concerns about Ethan growing distant, he would simply shrug. "Mom, he's growing up. It's normal for kids to get busy with their friends, their own lives." His words were a dismissal, an erasure of her maternal instincts, a further confirmation of his complicity. Eleanor documented it all. Not in a physical journal, but in the sharp, precise ledger of her memory. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every choice driven by convenience over compassion, the forgotten birthdays, the skipped holidays, the hurried phone calls, the patronizing advice. It was all evidence, building a formidable case against the very people she had loved, against the son she had raised. Bethany's declaration on the porch the previous evening. "She's not your real grandma. She's just your father's mother, honey. Not really family like us," was the final, undeniable piece of evidence. It solidified everything, confirmed her darkest suspicions about the depth of Bethany's contempt and Michael's apathy. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Or rather, the key that unlocked Eleanor's resolve. For the first time in 3 long years, Eleanor felt a thrill of anticipation, a genuine flutter of excitement. The performance, her carefully constructed illusion of poverty, would end tonight. The curtain was about to fall. She pulled out her phone, a device that Bethany often critiqued as being too fancy for her budget, and quickly accessed her investment accounts. The numbers glowed on the screen, a testament to her quiet acumen and Arthur's legacy. $52 million. The renewable energy sector had been particularly kind in the last quarter. More than enough. More than enough for her own comfort, for her peace of mind, and crucially, more than enough for Ethan's future, a future she intended to secure, far from the influence of his parents' greed. Eleanor rose from the pull-out couch, her aching back a minor inconvenience. She walked to the small mirror in the corner, looking at her reflection. An old woman, perhaps, with lines etched around her eyes and mouth. But in those eyes, a spark, a glint of steel. She would endure one more day of being treated as a burden, as a woman of no consequence. Tonight, they would see. Tonight, the tables would turn. The sun rose over the lake, casting a golden hue over the cabin, promising a beautiful, if tense, day. The morning after Bethany's blunt declaration about Eleanor not being real family. A subtle but noticeable shift in Eleanor's demeanor began to surface. It was a faint tremor beneath the surface of her carefully constructed facade, but it was enough to catch Bethany's wary attention. The morning passed with the usual rhythm of their family vacations. Michael was, as always, engrossed in his work emails, a constant hum of productivity that excused him from any meaningful engagement. Bethany, meanwhile, was meticulously preparing for a short hike along the lake, her athletic wear pristine, her water bottle perfectly chilled. Ethan, full of boundless 8-year-old energy, bounced around the cabin, restless and eager for adventure. Eleanor continued to play her part, moving a little slower, speaking a little softer, appearing just a tad more fragile. But beneath the familiar veneer, a new energy crackled, a quiet anticipation, a barely contained excitement that she found almost impossible to suppress. The lightness she felt, knowing that the charade was mere hours from its grand finale, was intoxicating. Bethany, ever observant and subtly suspicious, paused in her preparations, her eyes narrowing as she watched Eleanor refill her teacup. "You seem energetic today, Mom," she commented, her tone laced with an almost accusatory edge. "Did you actually get some sleep on that old pullout?" Eleanor turned, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "Yes, dear. I actually slept better than expected. Knowing something important is finally coming to an end tends to do that for me." She watched Bethany's brow furrow slightly, a flicker of unease in her eyes. The double meaning of Eleanor's words went right over Bethany's head, but the unusual cheerfulness did not. Later, as they embarked on their hike, more of a leisurely stroll along a paved path by the lake, Eleanor surprised everyone. For 3 years, she had cultivated the image of a frail, aging woman, prone to shortness of breath and needing frequent rests. Today, she walked with purpose, her stride even and strong, easily keeping pace with Michael and Bethany, who were usually far ahead. Her eyes were bright, taking in the scenery with a newfound appreciation, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Ethan, ever perceptive, noticed the change first. He skipped ahead, then looked back at Eleanor, his young eyes wide with curiosity. "Nana, you're walking really fast. You usually get tired much quicker." Eleanor merely winked at him, maintaining her brisk pace. "Sometimes, Ethan, when you're anticipating something wonderful, it gives you a burst of energy." Again, the words held a hidden meaning, a subtle clue that only she understood. Michael, pulling his attention from his phone for a moment, finally caught on. He saw the unusual vigor in his mother's steps, the almost youthful glint in her eyes. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You seem different today." He sounded genuinely concerned, but Eleanor knew it was more out of surprise than deep care. His concern was for the disruption of his expectation, not for her well-being. She looked at him, her son, and silently acknowledged how profoundly different things were about to become for all of them. They reached a secluded cove by the lake, a perfect spot for relaxation. Bethany immediately found a comfortable patch of sun, pulling out her phone to take selfies, posing with exaggerated smiles, meticulously framing each shot. Eleanor watched her, a detached observer. Not once did Bethany invite Eleanor to join, nor did she even glance in her direction, confirming Eleanor's place as an outsider in their curated family moments. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Michael, who was already back on his phone, oblivious to his wife's vanity and his son's need for engagement. He had once been a kind, attentive boy, but somewhere along the way, he had become a man who measured loyalty in dollars, whose compassion was conditional, whose attention was perpetually divided between his screen and his self-serving wife. Ethan, however, grew bored with his mother's photo session. He wandered towards the water's edge, his curiosity piqued by the smooth, colorful stones scattered along the shore. He began collecting them, carefully examining each one, his little treasure hunt far more engaging than posing for pictures. Soon, he had a small pile, and with a triumphant grin, he approached Eleanor. "Nana, look what I found. This one looks like a frog, and this one is shiny," he exclaimed, pouring his collection into her lap. Eleanor smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her. This was the connection she cherished, the pure, unburdened love that had kept her going through the charade. She pushed aside the thoughts of Michael and Bethany, focusing solely on the boy in front of her. For the next hour, They sat together by the lake, Eleanor listening patiently as Ethan explained the unique qualities of each rock, helping him stack them into miniature castles, sharing in his innocent delight. These simple, rationed moments of connection were precious, a lifeline in the sea of her family's neglect. She savored every second, knowing that soon, these moments wouldn't have to be rationed. Soon, Ethan would know the full truth. And with it, the freedom to choose. If you're finding Eleanor's story as captivating as I am, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to hear how this incredible tale of quiet strength and ultimate triumph unfolds. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Back at the lake, the sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the water. Michael, finally tearing his attention away from his phone, observed Ethan still nestled beside Eleanor, meticulously arranging small stones. A flicker of something akin to jealousy, or perhaps just mild surprise, crossed his face. Ethan really seems to gravitate towards you. Mom, he commented, a hint of something unreadable in his tone. Eleanor merely smiled, helping Ethan place a flat gray stone atop a burgeoning rock tower. We understand each other, she replied, her voice soft but firm. The truth of that statement resonated deeply within her. Ethan, despite his parents' subtle machinations, instinctively felt the unconditional love she offered. Bethany, who had been listening from her sun-drenched perch, chimed in, her voice anything but sweet. Though, I hope he's not becoming too dependent. Children need to learn that people can't always be there for them, you know. Life's tough. The casual cruelty of her words, meant to subtly undermine Eleanor's connection with Ethan, hit Eleanor hard. Her jaw clenched almost imperceptibly, a momentary battle to maintain composure. Then, she straightened, her gaze meeting Bethany's directly across the expanse of the cove. Her voice, though still outwardly gentle, carried a new, unyielding steel. People should be able to depend on family. That's what family means. Bethany's sharp eyes narrowed, sensing the subtle shift in Eleanor's demeanor. The customary meekness was gone, replaced by a quiet assertiveness. Well, yes, in an ideal world, Bethany retorted, quickly regaining her footing. But people need to be realistic about what others can provide, Mom. Financially, emotionally, everyone has their limits. Eleanor simply nodded, her smile returning. But this time it was a knowing, almost predatory curve of her lips that made Bethany frown in genuine confusion. Oh yes, Eleanor agreed, her voice laced with an irony that was entirely lost on Bethany. People should definitely be realistic about what others can provide. The subtext, for Eleanor, hung heavy in the air. They were about to learn just how unrealistic their expectations had been. As they gathered their belongings to head back to the cabin, Eleanor made her next strategic move. You know, she said, addressing the group, her voice bright. Since it's our last night here, I think we should have a special dinner, a real family meal. Michael, already contemplating the ease of the evening, immediately suggested. Oh, Mom, don't bother. We can just order pizza. It's easier. Eleanor shook her head, a hint of playful determination in her eyes. Nonsense. I insist. After you've all been so accommodating, allowing me to join you on this wonderful trip, she paused, letting the words hang. It's the least I can do. I'd love to cook for everyone. Bethany's eyes narrowed again. She detected the challenging tone beneath the feigned humility. Well, she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. The cabin kitchen is pretty small, Mom, and I doubt you have the ingredients for anything special. Eleanor simply offered another enigmatic smile. Oh, I think I'm more resourceful than people give me credit for, Bethany. You'd be surprised what I can conjure up. Back at the tiny cabin kitchen, Eleanor moved with a quiet efficiency. The space was indeed cramped, a stark contrast to the sprawling, state-of-the-art kitchen she had in her own, undisclosed apartment, or the gourmet kitchen she had once enjoyed in her family home. As she began to prepare an expensive, carefully planned meal, a mix of sadness and profound anticipation churned within her. Sadness for the years of neglect, the lost opportunities for genuine connection, and anticipation for the coming revelation. She had secreted away the prime cuts of steak and fresh asparagus, bought specifically for this evening. Far from Bethany's prying eyes in the pantry, When Michael poked his head into the kitchen, drawn by the sizzling sounds, Eleanor offered another smooth lie. "Look what I found, Michael. Wonderful steaks on sale at that little butcher shop down the road. Just perfect for our last night." Michael, distracted by a new notification on his phone, barely registered her words, grunting his approval. Then Bethany appeared, drawn by the enticing aromas. Her expression was a mixture of suspicion and grudging curiosity. "Steaks? Where did you get the money for?" She stopped herself, her eyes flicking to the array of fresh, high-quality ingredients Eleanor was expertly handling. "And what do you mean? Last night?" she asked, her tone sharper. Eleanor looked up, her gaze steady. "Of our vacation, dear." She offered a sweet, almost innocent smile. But both women knew the true meaning behind her words. This wasn't just the last night of their trip. This was the last night of the charade, the last night of Bethany's dominion. Eleanor felt the subtle vibration of her phone in her apron pocket. It was a text from David Miller. "All set, Eleanor." Standing by, she took a deep breath, the rich scent of cooking food filling the small kitchen. The stage was set. The players were in position. She walked to the screen door, her voice clear and strong. "Ethan, dinner's ready, sweet pea." A genuine smile, full of quiet triumph, illuminated her face. The waiting was almost over. The small cabin dining table, usually adorned with takeout containers or simple, quickly prepared meals, was transformed. Eleanor had pulled out all the stops. Plates of perfectly cooked prime ribeye, glistening with herbs and butter, were presented alongside tender roasted asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes. A rich, dark chocolate lava cake with raspberry coulis sat waiting in the kitchen for dessert. The aroma alone was enough to silence the usual chatter. Michael and Bethany stared at their plates, genuinely surprised. Eleanor, for 3 years, had presented herself as someone who struggled to boil water, let alone orchestrate such a feast. "Mom," Michael finally managed, his fork hovering over his steak. "When did you learn to cook like this?" "This is incredible." Eleanor met his gaze, a slight smile playing on her lips. "I've always cooked like this, Michael. You just haven't been paying attention." The words, delivered softly, carried a sting that only Eleanor fully appreciated. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrents, was already digging in with gusto. "Nana, this is the best dinner ever," he exclaimed, his face smeared with mashed potatoes. Eleanor's heart warmed, a sharp contrast to the cold satisfaction she felt watching Bethany. Bethany, after her initial surprise, grew increasingly suspicious. The meal was undeniably expensive, far beyond anything Eleanor had ever claimed to afford. Her eyes narrowed as she chewed, processing the flavors. "The quality." "Mom," she probed, her voice carefully casual. "Those steaks, they must have cost a fortune. Are you sure they were on sale?" Eleanor looked directly at her, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Oh, absolutely," she reiterated her smooth lie. "A fantastic deal. You just have to know where to look, Bethany." Resourcefulness, as I said. The meal continued, a delicious, tension-filled affair. Eleanor observed them, noting how Michael devoured his food with gusto, completely absorbed in the sensory experience, while Bethany picked at hers, her brow furrowed in thought. Her suspicion mounting. Ethan, meanwhile, was simply enjoying his Nana's cooking. When the last remnants of the lava cake had been savored, and coffee was poured, Eleanor set down her fork, a deliberate clink against the ceramic plate. She then reached for a bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, a vintage Michael and Bethany would never have afforded, and poured herself a small glass. The rich, dark liquid swirled, mirroring the turbulent emotions beneath her calm exterior. "I think," Eleanor began, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the comfortable hum of after-dinner quiet. "It's time we talked about luck and money and honesty." Michael, who had been lazily scrolling on his phone again, paused, his thumb still on the screen. The unusual tone in his mother's voice, the sudden shift in atmosphere, finally alerted him. Bethany's hand tightened around her coffee cup, her eyes flicking nervously between Eleanor and Michael. She sensed a threat, an impending confrontation she couldn't quite place. Ethan, ever innocent, looked up from his dessert. "What do you mean, Nana?" Eleanor offered him a gentle smile, then turned back to the adults. "Sometimes, Ethan, adults don't tell each other the whole truth. And sometimes, that causes problems. Big problems." Michael slowly put his phone down, his full attention finally on his mother. "Mom, what are you getting at?" His voice was cautious, a flicker of genuine concern replacing his usual indifference. Eleanor savored the moment, allowing the silence to stretch, to amplify the tension. This was it, the reveal. "You've all been operating under some significant misunderstandings about my situation," she began, her gaze sweeping over them both. "My financial situation, specifically." Bethany's voice rose, a sharp, nervous edge to it. "What misunderstandings? We've been perfectly clear about your difficulties." The word hung in the air, a loaded accusation. Eleanor allowed herself a fleeting moment of satisfaction, relishing the sudden pallor that had spread across Bethany's face. "You made assumptions," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, "about what your father, Arthur, left me. You made assumptions about my future, about my ability to care for myself, and about your own responsibilities towards me." Michael pushed his half-empty coffee cup aside, dinner and dessert completely forgotten. He leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Mom, what are you saying?" Eleanor took a slow sip of her wine, enjoying the taste. "The moment. What I'm saying, Michael, is that your father and I were much, much better with money than any of you ever realized." She then reached into her purse, which she had deliberately placed on the table beside her, and pulled out a slim, elegant tablet. With a few deft taps, she brought up a summary page, turning the screen to face Michael and Bethany. The glowing digits on the screen were stark, undeniable, and utterly devastating to their preconceived notions. The bold, white numbers stood out against a dark background. $52,347,891, Bethany gasped, a choked, strangled sound. She squinted at the screen, then at Eleanor, then back at the screen, as if unable to reconcile the two. That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible, the color completely drained from her face. The silence that followed the revelation of Eleanor's net worth was deafening, broken only by the gentle lapping of the lake outside. Bethany, her face ashen, could only whisper, That's impossible." Eleanor nodded calmly, her gaze steady, confirming the numbers on the tablet. "It's all very real, Bethany. The investments, the real estate, the trust accounts, all meticulously managed, just as Arthur planned. The only thing that wasn't real was the poverty I've been performing for the past 3 years." Michael pushed back his chair with a loud scrape, the sound jarring in the sudden stillness. His eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Performing? Mom? What the hell are you talking about?" Eleanor met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "I'm talking about a test, Michael, a 3-year test, to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you except need, to see if the love and family bond you claimed to have for me was truly unconditional, or if it was merely transactional." Another silence descended, heavier this time, as the full, devastating weight of her words crashed down upon Michael and Bethany. The comfortable understanding they had of their family dynamics, their roles, their easy dismissal of Eleanor, shattered into a million pieces. Bethany was the first to react, a shrill, disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. "A test? This is a cruel joke, Eleanor. You can't be serious." Eleanor simply turned the tablet to a more detailed page, displaying specific accounts and figures. "Oh, I assure you, it's very serious. Although I suppose there's some irony in you calling something cruel." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Michael, his mind reeling, stammered, "But the apartment, your money worries, all those times you said you couldn't afford, the way you what, Michael?" Eleanor prompted, her voice sharp now, cutting through his bewildered protest. "The way you became distant? The way you allowed your wife to treat me like a burden? The way you excluded me from family gatherings? The way Bethany explained to Ethan just yesterday that I wasn't really part of this family? Michael's face went from pale to ghostly white. The pieces clicked into place, painting a picture of his own complicity that was far uglier than he had ever imagined. "For 3 years," he whispered, a dawning horror in his eyes. "You've been testing us." Eleanor delivered the blunt verdict, her voice devoid of emotion. "And you failed. Spectacularly." Bethany, fueled by a surge of defensive rage, sprang to her feet, knocking her chair over with a loud clatter. "This is insane! You can't just lie to your family for 3 years and then act like we're the villains. You manipulated us," she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. Eleanor remained seated, perfectly composed, a still point in the storm of Bethany's fury. "I didn't lie. Bethany, not truly. I simply allowed you to reveal who you really were when you thought there was nothing in it for you. I allowed you to show your true colors, unburdened by the expectation of inheritance or financial gain. We took care of you," Bethany screeched, gesturing wildly. "We included you in vacations. We called. What more did you want?" Eleanor's gaze was ice cold. "You warehoused me, Bethany. You managed me like an unpleasant obligation. You offered superficial gestures while systematically excluding me from meaningful family moments. You saw an old woman with no money and decided she had no value. And Michael," she turned her cutting gaze to her son, who flinched under its intensity. "You let her." Ethan, who had been quietly observing the escalating argument, suddenly burst out, his small voice trembling. "Why are you all yelling? Nana, why are they yelling?" Eleanor instantly softened, turning to her grandson. "It's all right, sweet pea. We're just having a very important discussion. And sometimes adults raise their voices when things are important." Bethany, however, was beyond reason. "Don't you dare talk to him. You're a manipulative, deceitful old woman. You're a liar," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Eleanor. Eleanor turned back to Bethany, her voice now dangerously low, each word a cold, precise accusation. "I've been observing you, Bethany. I've watched you subtly degrade me, dismiss me. You treated me like a burden, an inconvenience, a drain on your precious resources. And worst of all, you started teaching Ethan that loving someone, valuing someone, was conditional on what they could provide." Michael finally found his voice, a desperate plea. "Mom, if you had just told us, if we had known." Eleanor cut him off, her gaze piercing. "Known what, Michael? Would your respect and affection have magically returned? Would Bethany's contempt have vanished? Or would you simply have found new, more elaborate ways to manage your rich mother for your own gain?" She then turned back to Bethany, her voice unwavering. "You, Bethany, took pleasure in my perceived poverty. You actively poisoned my relationship with my grandson, with Michael's passive consent." Bethany stumbled backward, her face now a sickening shade of gray. The relentless stream of Eleanor's accusations, each one undeniable, seemed to physically drain her. There was no defense, no escape from the mirror Eleanor held up to her. Eleanor continued, mercilessly. "Just yesterday, you told Ethan I wasn't his real grandmother, not really family like us. That was the final confirmation I needed of your true character, of how actively you were destroying genuine relationships within this family." Bethany's breathing became shallow, ragged gasps filling the small room. Her face cycled through shades of white and an unhealthy red. She pressed a hand to her forehead, swaying precariously. I think I'm going to be sick," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Michael could even reach her, Bethany's eyes rolled back in her head. She collapsed to the floor with a dull thud, her chair falling with her. A final, dramatic exclamation point on Eleanor's devastating verdict. The heavy thud of Bethany's collapse echoed in the small dining room. Michael scrambled to her side, his earlier rage replaced by a frantic concern. Eleanor, however, remained seated, a picture of serene composure. She slowly, deliberately, finished the last sip of her expensive Cabernet, feeling a quiet satisfaction ripple through her as the full weight of her deception and their failure crashed down around them. Ethan, small and frightened by the sudden chaos, looked at his grandmother with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Nana, is Mommy okay?" Eleanor leaned towards him, her voice gentle, reassuring. "She'll be fine, sweet pea. Sometimes people just get a little overwhelmed when they realize they've made some very serious mistakes." She gave his hand a squeeze, then turned her attention back to the unfolding drama. Michael, still kneeling beside his slowly stirring wife, looked up at Eleanor, his face etched with a desperate question. "What happens now, Mom?" Eleanor offered a faint smile. "Now, Michael, we have an honest conversation about the future. Once your wife wakes up, of course." A few shaky moments later, Bethany's eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes, still glazed with shock, slowly focused on Eleanor, who sat calmly across the room. The memories of the tablet, the numbers, the accusations, rushed back. This wasn't a nightmare. This was real. You fainted," Michael explained softly, helping her sit up. "When Mom told us about the money," Bethany's voice was flat, devoid of its usual sharp edge. "She really has $50 million, Eleanor corrected her, her tone precise. 52 million. As of this morning's market close, and yes, Bethany, I've had access to that kind of liquid wealth, and more in various real estate holdings, for the past 3 years. All the while, you believed I was barely scraping by." Michael's eyes, fixed on his mother, held a pleading disbelief. "You've had this money for 3 years. You watched us struggle. You let us think you were poor." He stopped, the full scope of her calculated deception finally hitting him. Eleanor's voice was firm, unyielding. "I let you reveal who you really were, Michael. I didn't make you treat me badly. I simply gave you the opportunity to show your true character. And you, and Bethany, seized that opportunity with both hands." Bethany, still disoriented but her mind already scrambling for an angle, looked up at Eleanor. "But why? Why would you do this to us? To your own family?" Eleanor met her gaze. "Because I needed to know. I needed to know who you'd become, Michael, and who you would marry, Bethany, and most importantly, what kind of people would be influencing my grandson's understanding of family loyalty, of respect, and of genuine love." Michael's voice was tight with suppressed fury. "You lied. You manipulated us. You set us up to fail. I observed you." Eleanor corrected him coldly. "Everything you did, every slight, every dismissal, every cruel word, was entirely your decision. I simply didn't correct your assumptions. You jumped to conclusions about my worth, and you acted on them." A flicker of the old Bethany returned, her eyes bright with a sudden desperate calculation. "But now that we know," she started, her voice trying to sound conciliatory. "Everything can be different. We can start over." Eleanor cut her off, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "We cannot start over, Bethany. You can't unknow who you really are. And I can't forget what I've learned about both of you." She then pulled a pristine manila envelope from her purse, placing it deliberately on the table. "I've spent the last 3 years not just observing, but planning. I've made some very clear decisions about my will, my assets, and most importantly, our future family relationships." Michael swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the envelope. "My estate," Eleanor announced, her voice calm but resolute, "will be held in trust for Ethan until his 25th birthday. It will be administered by my attorney, David Miller, and a reputable financial company, not by any family members." Bethany made a choked sound of despair, a guttural groan. "You're cutting us out completely," she stated flatly, the full weight of her financial loss crashing down on her. "I'm ensuring Ethan's future, regardless of his parents' character," Eleanor clarified. "But yes, your direct access to my wealth is gone. However, there are conditions, and these conditions apply to both of you." She leaned forward slightly. "Ethan must maintain a genuine, unmediated relationship with me. If at any point you attempt to poison him against me, to alienate him, or to restrict our time together without valid, pre-approved reasons, the entire trust will be immediately dissolved, and all funds will go to a designated charity. Eleanor also revealed, I've already established an independent fund for Ethan's education and welfare. This fund is entirely separate and completely inaccessible to either of you. Michael's jaw clenched. You're bribing us, he accused, his voice laced with bitterness. I'm protecting myself and my grandson, Eleanor countered. From your demonstrated willingness to cut people out of family relationships when it suits your convenience and perceived financial gain. For the next 17 years, you will demonstrate to me that my exclusion will not happen again. Bethany, close to fainting once more, whimpered. This is blackmail. Eleanor smiled, a cold, unfeeling expression. No, Bethany, this is consequences. She then revealed her next decision. I'm also moving. To a new house, about 2 hours from here. Far enough to maintain my independence, my space. Michael's voice cracked. That means we'll have to make a real effort to see you. Precisely, Eleanor affirmed. Bethany, her voice a desperate whisper, asked, what if we don't agree to this? What if we don't like your terms? Eleanor's smile remained. Then Ethan will still inherit everything when he turns 25. But you, Michael and Bethany, will have spent nearly 2 decades knowing that your treatment of his grandmother cost your family $52 million. Aren't you just making your love conditional too? Michael demanded, a hint of desperation in his tone. My love for Ethan has never wavered. Eleanor clarified, her voice softening slightly when speaking of her grandson. But my willingness to financially support people who have demonstrated their disdain for me, who actively sought to diminish my place in their lives, that ship has sailed. You have a choice. You can begin to rebuild a relationship with me based on genuine respect and effort. Or you can reject these terms and then spend the next 2 decades explaining to Ethan why his college fund, his inheritance, his future, went to a charity because of your actions. Bethany openly cried, sobbing that they didn't know. Eleanor's voice remained calm, cutting through Bethany's lament. If you had known about the money, you would have treated me well for exactly the wrong reasons. Because you were obligated, because you wanted a piece of it. That's not love, Bethany. That's manipulation. And that's what I refuse to be subjected to. Michael, holding his head in his hands, finally looked up, his eyes filled with a weary defeat. What do you want from us, Mom? I want you to decide who you want to be, Eleanor told him simply. You can't pretend the past 3 years didn't happen. The choices you made, the people you became, those are real. Eleanor then rose, leaving the manila envelope on the table. I'll give you both the night to discuss this. My attorney will be in touch tomorrow morning to formalize the arrangements. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Michael and Bethany to their stunned silence and profound distress. The first light of dawn crept into the cabin, painting the walls with a soft, forgiving glow. Eleanor awoke, not to the uncomfortable ache of the pull-out couch, but to the faint, frantic whispers emanating from Michael and Bethany's bedroom. They were still up, still trying to navigate the wreckage of the previous night, still desperately searching for a loophole, a way out of the inescapable terms Eleanor had laid bare. She rose, feeling surprisingly refreshed. The burden of her secret, the weight of the performance, had lifted. In the kitchen, Ethan was already awake, cheerfully munching on cereal, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had rocked his parents' world. He looked up, his face bright. Nana, can we build rock castles again today? Eleanor smiled, a genuine heartfelt smile that carried a touch of wistfulness. I hope so, Ethan. I really hope so. The words were for him, but also for herself. A quiet prayer for the fragile future. A few minutes later, Michael appeared, looking disheveled and aged beyond his years. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders slumped. He avoided Eleanor's direct gaze, his focus fixed on the floor. Mom, he said, his voice hoarse. Can we talk? Outside? Eleanor nodded, and they stepped onto the porch, the cool morning air, a stark contrast to the heated emotions of the night. Michael stood at the railing, staring out at the serene lake. Then, without preamble, he turned to her. We want to accept your terms, Mom. All of them. He paused, taking a ragged breath. Bethany isn't happy, of course. She's devastated. But she understands. We both understand. We have no choice. Eleanor's gaze was firm, unwavering. This isn't about choice, Michael. Not anymore. This is about character. If you're only accepting my terms because you feel trapped, because you see no other way to access my money through Ethan, then we're not building anything real. We're just extending the charade. Michael flinched at her blunt honesty. He stared out at the water, his jaw working. Then, quietly, almost a whisper, he said, "I failed you. Didn't I, Mom? As a son, I completely failed you." Eleanor felt a pang of sadness, not triumph. The sight of her son, broken and vulnerable, evoked a complex swirl of emotions. "You failed yourself, Michael," she told him gently. "You became someone I didn't recognize, someone who measured worth in dollars, and let convenience dictate his loyalty." Tears streamed down Michael's face, silent and heavy. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Eleanor considered her response carefully. "I can learn to forgive you, Michael. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. The damage that was done, the distance that grew between us, the lessons Bethany tried to teach Ethan. Those things happened. They are real. And they will always be a part of our story." Michael nodded, accepting her words. "What do we do now?" "Now," Eleanor explained, "you prove that you mean what you're saying. You prove it through consistent, respectful behavior. Through effort. Through showing up, not just for Ethan, but for me." Over time, regarding Bethany, Eleanor stated, "Bethany will have to decide who she wants to be in all of this. Her choice will determine what kind of relationship she has with the money that will ultimately shape Ethan's future." "And with Ethan himself," Michael winced. "She's scared, Mom," Eleanor replied, her voice devoid of sympathy. "She should be, Michael. Fear is an appropriate response to realizing that her actions have severe, undeniable consequences." Michael wiped his face with the back of his hand. I want Ethan to know his real grandmother. I want him to know you. Truly. Then you must actively work to make that happen," Eleanor told him. "No more passive acceptance of Bethany's remarks, no more allowing me to be excluded. You must be the one to bridge that gap." She looked him directly in the eyes, her gaze piercing. "This is your last chance, Michael. For all of us." 6 months later, Eleanor was settled into her new house, a charming cottage nestled in a quiet town 2 hours from Michael and Bethany. The distance was intentional. It meant that visits required effort, thought, and true intent. Michael visited every other weekend, sometimes with Bethany, sometimes alone. Eleanor appreciated his consistent effort to rebuild. He called regularly, not out of obligation, but with genuine questions about her well-being. He was slowly, painstakingly, becoming the son she had once known, or at least a version of him she could respect. Bethany's adjustment was a painful process to watch, but Eleanor knew it was necessary. She settled into a cautious politeness, her interactions with Eleanor stiff but respectful. Eleanor knew Bethany would likely never like her, would likely never truly forgive her for exposing her true character. But respect, Eleanor decided, was enough. The real victory, however, was Ethan. Their relationship blossomed beautifully. He spent every other weekend with Eleanor, their days filled with laughter, learning, and quiet companionship. He helped her in her new garden, reading stories, and, yes, even building rock castles by the small creek that ran through her backyard. One sunny afternoon, as Ethan meticulously transplanted basil seedlings, he looked up at Eleanor, his brow furrowed in thought. "Nana," he asked, "Mom says, you're really rich. Is that true?" Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with love for this bright, honest boy. "Yes, sweet pea, that's true." Ethan considered this, then nodded. "I don't think so," he said thoughtfully. "You're still the same person who builds rock castles and makes the best pancakes. Money doesn't change that, right?" Eleanor's eyes welled up. "No, Ethan," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. "Money doesn't change who we are inside. It just sometimes reveals who other people really are. He pulled back, his eyes alight with a child's simple wisdom. So, can I go to college wherever I want? Eleanor chuckled. You'll certainly have options, my dear. But you still have to work hard. That evening, as Eleanor watched the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. Thank you for today, Mom. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about the garden. Same time in 2 weeks. Eleanor typed her response, a small, contented smile on her face. Of course, Michael. Drive safely. The relationship wasn't perfect. Not yet. But it was honest. It was built on truth, on earned respect, and on the conscious effort to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Bethany remained something of a permanent outsider, her role defined by her past choices, but Ethan's future was secure, his understanding of family loyalty shaped by genuine love, not financial expectation. The test was over. Eleanor raised her glass of evening tea, a quiet toast to her 70-year-old self. She had refused to be diminished, refused to be forgotten, and refused to let greed define her family. The truth, finally revealed, had indeed set them all free.